Not that it's just this simple, but I would say that a good 80% of the pushback that you get from him is because his anxiety has been raised or he's feeling criticized. I know it's not that simple, but if you reflect back of all the times that he has given you some grief to one degree or another, the vast majority of the time it's either because his anxiety was up or he downloaded your delivery such that he felt criticized. His self-esteem is already in the toilet. It doesn't take much for him to feel criticized. Sometimes your neutral comments download to him as criticism. You're not necessarily being critical or doing anything wrong, but he's going to download it in a certain way because he's hypersensitive. Hypersensitive. If you can keep his anxiety reduced, you're never going to eliminate it. And if you can be careful with your wording and timing with respect to your message delivery, you will cut your workload greatly and you will cut your grief greatly. Just think of ASD as a disorder of social skills and emotional intelligence. The two things that come with the territory that I want to talk about in this minute is mind blindness and emotions blindness. So if I have ASD level 1, I'm going to be blind to, in this case, my NT wife's perspectives, her thoughts, her motives, her opinions. I'm going to be blind to that. I'm also going to be blind to her feelings. And even if she tells me how she feels, it doesn't help my sight. So here's where it gets weird. Because if he doesn't understand, if you're not thinking the way that he is thinking on the issue in question, and if you're not feeling the way he's feeling on the issue in question, he, at an unconscious level, downloads that as she's disagreeing with me. We're not on the same page thought-wise and feeling-wise, therefore she is disagreeing with me. The next thinking error, because she's disagreeing with me, therefore she is against me. This is exactly how his brain works. It gets worse than this. Because she's against me, I must get defensive and prove that I'm right. Because in his mind blindness and emotions blindness, only one person can be right. And it has to be me because my opinion, my feelings are the only ones I can see. So since only one person can be right, and since my opinion is the only opinion that I understand, therefore her opinion, her logic, her feelings are invalid. I want to repeat this again in summary. Here's the steps. I don't know how many steps there are. 5 or 6 in there. I have ASD level 1. Therefore, I'm going to have some mind blindness and emotions blindness. Therefore, when she doesn't think the same way I do on a particular thing, or doesn't feel the same way that I do about a particular thing, therefore she's disagreeing with me. Therefore, she's against me. Therefore, I have to defend myself because I know only one person can be right. I don't see gray areas. I don't realize that there's often two truths. So since I can only see my logic and my feelings, therefore her logic and her feelings are invalid. And you download, and why wouldn't you, as he doesn't care about my opinions. My thoughts on the matter doesn't matter. He doesn't care about my feelings. No, he doesn't see your perspective. It's not like he sees your perspective and he understands it, but he totally rejects it. It's not that he sees your feelings and understands your feelings, but doesn't care. That's not what's going on. You have to see something, and then you have to understand what you're seeing, and then you have to decide to reject it. He doesn't see it. He doesn't get to step 2 or 3. Do you have any suggestions for turning an ASD strength into a relationship strength? They seem to be mutually exclusive. Well, yeah, they can seem to be. That's a good question. There are some strengths that you will have that the neurotypicals won't have. And also with respect to, and you use the term relationship strength. just understand that that's going to be a relationship strength is going to be only assessed in the eye of the beholder. So you may exhibit a relationship strength that you have, and this person might really value that and be impressed by that. And you may exhibit the same strength to somebody else, and they may not even view it as a strength. It may not impress them at all, may not establish any kind of meaningful connection for them. So that's going to be very relative as point number one. Maybe a good angle to come at would be to contrast your strengths with the typical neurotypical, the typical neurotypical. They often will fail to notice what's in front of their eyes because they're distracted by social cues, which you don't tend to pay attention to. They're distracted by random small chit chat, which you don't engage in. You are very good at tuning in to specific details, and you have a much better memory with respect to details than neurotypicals tend to have. If you've ever joined a group or a club or whatever just to fit in, right? You're joining a particular club just to fit in. You know how hard it is to be true to yourself when you're trying to fit in. People on the autism spectrum, they tend to view social expectations as rather irrelevant. Their interest and their passions are really what matters, not so much other people's expectations. And there again, this is relative. Some people would view that as a weakness. Some people would view that as a strength. And it can be both, depending on the situation. You will not tend to be too concerned about outward appearances. That's very much unlike your neurotypical friends. You're not going to be too worried about brand names of clothes, hairstyles, and so on. They will. Everybody claims to value the truth, but few people, and I'm specifically referring to neurotypicals, are truly truthful. They think they are, and they try to be, and they say they are when they're not. Most people on the autism spectrum, the truth is the truth. There's no shades of gray. It either the truth or is not the truth. So usually a good word from somebody with supposed ASD level 1 is the real deal. That's a relationship strength as far as I'm concerned. People on the autism spectrum, they don't play head games. They typically don't have ulterior motives, and they assume, actually they're a little gullible because they assume that their spouse won't play head games either. Oh, she does. She does. And you don't catch it when it happens, but she does. So that's a refreshing change from the emotional roller coaster that damages many neurodiverse relationships. I could go on the rest of the afternoon. The typical guy on the autism spectrum is not concerned who's richer, who's smarter, who's more talented, who's prettier, who's more handsome. For people on the spectrum, these distinctions don't really hold much importance. For neurotypicals, it does. So you will tend to see through such surface appearances to discover the real person underneath. Neurotypicals tend not to do that, on average. One might be emotional reasoning. This is where the person makes decisions and arguments based on how he feels rather than objective reality. I'm a big believer in using emotions as your gauge, but you need to use emotions as your gauge in combination with rational thought. So in the event that the ASD guy is totally operating on logic, that's dangerous. And you have run into many cases where your NT wife operates totally on emotions, that's equally as dangerous. So one of the things that I do when I start using emotional reasoning, because it feels this way, therefore it is this way, I go, wait a minute, no. What's the logic behind there? What's the reality that's going on? And I do this daily. I will do this daily in the moment when I'm starting to let my emotions dominate, or I'm operating on 99% emotions, 1% logic. I quickly go back and go, okay, what's really going on here? And what I do is I try to put myself in the other person's shoes and look at it from their angle. And when I do that, I realize, okay, I probably was making too much out of this. That's one of my favorite self-talk phrases right there. I'm probably making too much out of this. Another favorite phrase of mine, a go-to phrase when I'm trying to erase the distortion is, I think I'll just mind my own business instead of trying to predict other people's motives. That's a big one with me too. This is not going to be much consolation for her to hear what I'm getting ready to tell you, but it is the truth. But in the early going, they want to accuse you of masking. Oh, it was all a fake job. You were a great con man. It was all pretend. No.
I heard that.
No, it was not pretend. He was not faking it. She was his special interest, maybe not the number one special interest. She was way up there in the top one or two of his special interest at that time. Everything that he said or did, all the affection, sex, compassion, grace, mercy, etc., emotional reciprocity, give and take in conversation, all of it was very authentic. Once the romantic phase ends and the settling in phase begins, where we're just back to the mundane, routine, day-to-day living again, and I still love her, I still value the marriage, but the romance phase is over. That's when he kind of, her being his special interest, it kind of declines. And now he spends more of his time with his true special interest. Also, the relationship gets more complicated. In the early going of the relationship, like I mentioned to you at the top of the call, this lady that, well, when we were first dating, we'd go over there and get ice cream. In the early going, it's all fun and games and play. Once you get married and have kids and now have to work and pay the bills, it gets real complicated. And if you have ASD level 1, you're going to have some mind blindness and emotions blindness, and it's going to be hard to fire on all 8 cylinders if you don't have 8 cylinders. She's firing on 8. She's very intuitive. Her social and emotional intelligence is way up here. Her social and emotional skills and needs are also way up here. His are not. He does not have the same degree of emotional and social skills and needs as she does. And so that's a turnoff to her. And she thinks, well, you've kind of abandoned me. That's her download. You have abandoned me. You are emotionally unavailable. It's like living with a hologram. Well, that's very insulting. And that, by the way, that's her download. So your love hasn't diminished. Your respect for her as a person has not diminished. Your valuing the marriage has not diminished. What has diminished is your interest level in having high levels of emotional reciprocity and connection and give and take in conversation, and even sometimes sex kind of wanes after the years. So she takes, because he's doing these things that create distance, that's her download. You're not creating distance, she's perceiving distance. Because I'm downloading these behaviors in him as creating distance, therefore he doesn't love me, therefore I'm not important to him, therefore he doesn't really care about me, doesn't value the marriage, the work is more important to him than me. These are all her downloads. But that's secondarily your problem too, because now she's going to accuse you of being insensitive, uncaring, selfish, narcissistic, sociopathic. So that's the answer. That's the truth. And as I mentioned before, I even went into that monologue. That's really not going to help her much, because she's still going to think, okay, well, I understand cognitively what's going on here, but it doesn't help me emotionally. Well, you want me to lie? You want me to concoct some kind of sugar-coated thing to make you feel better? Or do you want the truth? I can either lie and make up some bullshit to make you feel better, or I can do the better option and just be totally honest with you about what's going on. And doing this for a number of years, that's usually what goes on with him. And I want to emphasize again, his love for her hasn't decreased. His respect for her hasn't decreased. His valuing the marriage hasn't decreased. One thing that has increased is her pushing for that original connection, which you distance even more from that. Her message raises your anxiety, and as an anxiety reduction strategy, you kind of pull away. She pursues, you pull away. She pursues, you pull away. And then she views this as abandonment. And then if this goes on for too long, she stops pursuing. And then worst case scenario, the two of you do become just roommates at that point and don't even try to work on anything anymore. But hopefully you'll intervene earlier down the road, and you're here, and you can let her listen to what I just said. Mm-hmm. The neurodiverse marriage has got so destructive, and it's understandable. The two of you are wired almost 180 degrees in opposite directions. Since it's so hard to make a connection when you're on opposite ends of the spectrum. This, I know I'm preaching to the choir at this point, this marriage has been super stressful. And both parties, I'm talking about him and you, I'm not just picking on you, he's just as guilty. Both of you have adopted a victim mentality. When both parties do that, your amygdala now is on high alert. Both parties are at an unconscious level scanning for bad news. I'll use you as the example. What's he going to say next that's going to hurt? What's he going to do next that makes me feel like I'm not important? What next thing that I need him to do is he not going to follow through with? And he does his own version of that with different things to you too. So now both parties are scanning for bad news. They're just kind of expecting it. And they're waiting for the other shoe to drop, which now you've set up a self-fulfilling prophecy, because as soon as you start scanning for the next bad thing that's going to happen, you find it quickly. And you will over-focus on it. And then when it happens, you will overreact to it. And then you will turn it into a memory, an emotional memory and a content memory. Think of something disastrous that happened with him that really hurt your feelings bad. You have the content memory, you remember what was said and done in that moment, but you also have an emotional memory. So every time you replay that event that was really hurtful, you also replay the emotions that you felt at that time. And even though that specific event only happened once, when you keep replaying that movie, it feels like it's happened 100 times. And this sensitizes your brain to negativity in the fullest sense of the term. You've heard the brain is plastic. You know, the brain has this thing called plasticity. You're literally rewiring your brain to recognize, focus, and react to the negativity at a scale much higher than what you originally did in the first year of marriage, for example. And then if that wasn't bad enough, both parties will tend to unintentionally ignore the positive. They can't see the positive. You know, your husband is doing something right, but you're blinded to he could be doing something right, but you can't even see it now. And he does the same thing with you. And as you know, if party A is negative, it brings out negativity in party B. And now party B then reinforces more negativity in party A, and you bounce back and forth and you get this synergy, this exponential effect where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 + 1 = 5, all of which it reinforces your need to scan for even more bad news. It reinforces your amygdala to be on even higher alert. And if this goes on for very long, guess who gets sicker? Who? Because you need to connect and process things and debrief in order to get your cortisol level down. He's over there de-escalating and decompressing by hyper-focusing on his special interests for extended periods of time. He always gets relief. And you never get relief. That's why she's the one that's always complaining about depression and fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune disease and numerous other things, because she never gets off of the cortisol hot plate. And this doesn't make you feel any better, I understand that, but I want you to know what the hell's going on. At the very least, maybe you will take some of these things less personally and realize, okay, well, he did that shit again, but I'm pretty sure based on what I know now, that was a trait. I don't think there was a malicious intent. I don't even think he knew what the hell he was doing. He didn't even know what's going on at the time. So not only was there not any malicious intent, he was totally absent. His behavior and the consequences of his behavior and how it impacts me doesn't even register in one brain cell. It was not premeditated at all. You have multiple interests in multiple domains of life. Well, all of you will have some interests that would fall into the following categories: spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, financially, vocationally, And the list would probably go on and on. You have a wide range of interests, a wide range of passions, eggs in multiple baskets. Who's the opposite of that? It only has one special interest in one domain of life, which is probably occupational. Spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, financially, vocationally, occupationally, a bunch of categories there, right? He has one special interest, and you would know which category that falls into. I just picked the one that seems to occur most often, and that's his job. You have 5 primary motivations. Or we could say, instead of primary motivations, we could say primary needs. That would be another term that would fit too. You have a survival need, which is a safety need. You're very concerned about feeling safe. I want to make sure the bills are paid. I want to make sure the kids are taken care of. I want to make sure we have gas in the car, etc. And you concern yourself with a lot of those primary basic needs because you're a caretaker by nature. Another one of your primary needs is love, belonging, connection, whatever we want to call it. That's an intimacy need. Another need that you have is one for power, significance, competence, whatever we want to call that. That's an esteem need. You have the need for freedom and autonomy, which is a self-reliance need. You want to have the freedom to do what you want and to have free choice. And you also have a need to play and have fun and to enjoy the little things in life, Just chit-chat with the neighbor. You find great joy in the little pleasures of life. Of those 5, I talked about survival, love, power, freedom, and fun. There again, wide range for you. Where's his at? It ain't with loving and belonging and connection. It's with freedom and autonomy. He's stuck in that one spot. In other words, he is very independent. He is very much a solo player who just happens to be married. Where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is giving his lopsidedness that is entrenched. It's baked in the cake, unchangeable. You will do yourself, the biggest favor you can do you is stop trying to change him. That's the biggest thing that you can do to help you. And so when you try to get him to be, I don't know what the antonym of lopsided would be, have a wider range of interests, have a wider range of needs. He doesn't have a whole lot of social and emotional needs. He could go all year and not talk about feelings. He could go all year and not hear about your feelings and not even know any information was missing. He's not going to have this broad approach to various things in life like you do. It's going to be very limited, one-tracked. You've tried to change it. God bless you. I know your heart was in the right spot. Guess what happens when you've tried to change it? Further entrenchment. More insisting on being a solo player, just happens to be married. More engagement in his one special interest. Now he spends most of his time doing that. Before he's only spending 80%. When you tried to change him, now he's upped it to 90%. That's what's going on. We're looking at it from a different angle. And the moral to the story is it's baked in the cake. He has a developmental disorder, which means it occurred in the womb. He was born with it. It's not a personality disorder. It's a brain wiring disorder. I'm thinking about the DSM-5 mental disorders, and I'm contrasting a developmental disorder with a personality disorder. People with a personality disorder, most of them can be fixed if they find the right therapist. And they're no longer, for example, histrionic or borderline or etc. But with a developmental disorder and some other disorders, which I'm not going to bore you with, it's unfixable. There's still some things that can be done, and a lot of things can be improved upon. So it's not just a hopeless case. There's a huge difference between somebody with ASD that has narcissistic personality traits versus someone with narcissistic personality disorder. Because the person with NPD, their behavior has a completely different set of motivations behind it compared to the ASD guy who exhibits some of those traits. The motivation, the desired outcome with exhibiting these behaviors is completely different. For example, I'm just going to come up with one. Maybe he has to always prove that he's right and his opinion is the only correct one, and you're stupid. Your opinion is always wrong. You might, well, it's so narcissistic. No, what we're talking about there is not a narcissistic trait. We're talking about mind blindness. So some of these narcissistic traits that he has nothing to do with narcissism. I would go on record as saying most of the traits that you would point your finger to that seem narcissistic, it's not narcissism at all. It's either mind blindness, emotions blindness, a dysfunctional anxiety reduction attempt, weak central coherence, problem with prediction. It would be those things, not technically a narcissistic personality thing. But her download is, he's selfish, insensitive, uncaring, narcissistic. That's her download. And I'm not faulting her because it looks like the same damn thing. It looks like the same damn thing. And so you want to label it. Now, what's underneath? What's behind the curtain? What's behind the curtain? Because when you open up that curtain, you realize, this isn't at all what I was labeling it. I guess I would say, sometimes the question comes up, okay, well, if you could just give one piece of advice, what would it be? Well, if I could only give one piece, it would be most of these traits that you are downloading as a personal affront that has unfortunately damaged your self-esteem and in some cases your health were his way of trying to dodge paintballs all day. Some of these traits that are still hurtful to you, they were dysfunctional methods that he used to cope with life and cope with mind blindness, emotions blindness, and the other 12 things that I discussed. It's purely a survival mechanism for him. And he can't see that he's going around and stepping on your heart as an unfortunate byproduct of that. They do grow up in almost all cases feeling defective and flawed. There's something wrong with me. There's something bad about me. And then, well, how can that be, Mark, with these narcissistic traits? The narcissist is full of shame and feeling defective and flawed. That's why they're that way, because they're hiding the fact that they know that they're a piece of shit inside, which is a thinking error. They're not a piece of shit inside, but they think they are. That's why they behave narcissistically. That's all a pretend job. It's all a pretend job. He's very much not very confident. He's not okay with himself inside. If he was, he wouldn't be this cocky, arrogant, pushy type of person. And you might have thought, well, he's just overly confident. No, he's underly confident. Otherwise, he wouldn't be behaving that way. The marriage goes through, well, there's different stages depending on what author or what book you're going to read, but there's approximately 5 stages that every marriage goes through, growth stages that they're supposed to go through. So it's a foreign topic, not to the guys in here at this point, based on what I'm saying now. It's a foreign topic to them, for them to think, oh, so the romance phase, which I'm very familiar with, that's not the only phase. There's the romance phase and the settling in phase. They can see those 2 phases. We had a romantic phase, and then we had the romantic phase is over phase. No, there's about 4 or 5 other stages of growth in the marriage beyond that span the entire lifetime. So that's an odd concept for them. She knows this marriage is always going to be a work in progress. We never arrive. The ASD husband goes, oh, fuck. So I got to have difficult conversations with you about social and emotional things for the rest of my life. Kinda.
It was not in the brochure.
They should tell you up front. They should give you a little manual. I am pronouncing you a man and a wife, and here's your manual. But if you take him to a neurotypical therapist, I can promise you, I will even take bets that he's going to get neurotypical advice that will not take into account mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivity, and about 5 or 6 other important. Love languages. Oh, I wish you could just speak to love. Those 5 love languages, that's not even one of those is his love language. Not one. His love language is just stop pointing out what I'm doing wrong and leave me alone more. That's his love. You want to speak his love language? Give him more space without complaining about it, without interrupting his private time, and stop pointing out everything that he's doing wrong. I'm not being funny. If you wanted to speak his love language, that was it right there. I'm not saying you should. You do what you want with that. But by God, that is his love language. You say what I say to him verbatim and see what he says. Well, Mark said your love language would be these 3 things. Me letting you have decompression time without interrupting you or complaining about it, and to stop pointing out everything you're doing wrong. Is that really would be your love language? I'd be really interested in seeing what he says. You think his love language is, oh, I want you to buy me, if you buy me more gifts, I'd do better. Or if you just provide me some quality time, we would really be getting along a lot better. No. There's so many different angles to come at why the couple is having such a problem. And this is a gross oversimplification again. In this case, the ASD husband is very logical and very task-oriented. Not that he doesn't have any social skills or emotional intelligence. I'm not saying that. She is almost the opposite. Instead of being directed towards completing tasks that have nothing to do with people, she's very social, and that's a big deal to her. Not that she can't just do mundane tasks that don't involve people, but that's not her preference. That is his preference. I'm not saying she doesn't have any logic, but she runs mostly on emotional intelligence. So you have the ASD husband runs mostly on logical intelligence, LQ we would call it. She runs mostly on social and emotional intelligence, which would be SQ and EQ. He's mostly involved in non-social tasks. She's mostly involved in social tasks. So you can see why there's so much upset. They're almost 100% diametrically opposed with respect to their skills, needs, wants, levels of intelligence, and whatnot. So that's the bad news. The good news is, as long as both parties are aware of what's going on, well, now there can be some kind of compromise. And there'll have to be a compromise. She's not going to come all the way over to his side, and he's not going to come all the way over to her side. Never going to happen. But there can be, and would be a fairly large middle ground, gray area, where he is purposely trying to be less task-oriented and asocial some of the time. And she's purposely trying to be less emotional and a little more, less need for deep intimacy, which he can't deliver. Her complaint is, he doesn't meet my social needs. He doesn't have a deep emotional connection with me. Yeah, you're right. Because he has ASD. That is ASD. That's not a symptom of ASD. That is ASD. Think of it as a disorder of social and emotional intelligence, which now means a disorder of social and emotional skills, and now means a lower need for social stuff and emotional connection. That's why the disparity, and the reason I wanted to mention that is because it would be good if the two of you could provide one another occasionally with a little grace and mercy, given the cards you've been dealt. That's what you've lived with. That's what you're living with now. And that thing I just described there, it's never going to change, ever. Continue to antagonize one another or realize, okay, this is what we're going to have to deal with. There's no way to fix it. I'm wired this way, he's wired that way. We're just going to have to deal with it. Or just agree to move on to the next relationship, which that happens too. If he has ASD level 1, he's going to have anxiety because he will have, to some degree or another, some mind blindness. He's going to have some degree, sometimes it's worse in others, not so bad in others, it's a mixed bag. Some degree he's going to have some emotions blindness. He's going to have some executive function deficits. He's not going to have all of them, but he's going to have more than one. And he's going to have some sensory sensitivities. There's another thing that I don't talk about too much called weak central coherence. So anyway, there's numerous challenges that come with the disorder, all of which create anxiety. And so this generic he, hypothetical he, will find a lot of anxiety reduction strategies. Some of them are functional, some of them are not functional. But he does engage in a lot of anxiety reduction attempts. For example, spending extensive periods of time on a special interest is a huge de-stressor for him. Due to anxiety, he may slip into a meltdown or a shutdown, or he may engage in false agreement, which is, yeah, you're right, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever you want, just for him to get the conversation over with, or he may just have an adult temper tantrum. So there's the anxiety due to the things I just listed, the traits of the disorder. Then there are his anxiety reduction attempts. Then the next step in this series of things, most of his anxiety reduction attempts cause relationship problems. So there's 3 steps now. Then she wants to have the talk, wants to work on it. She has a message to deliver. If she's not sensitive to the traits, especially if she doesn't even know about them. The talk, we need to have a talk. Now we're at step 6, it increases his anxiety. And then the cycle starts all over again. Due to mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, etc., he feels very confused in the marriage because he can't keep up with her social and emotional intelligence and needs and skills. He feels very insecure due to his inability to make her happy and to keep the peace and so on. So he feels very unsafe in this marriage. This causes anxiety. He tries to reduce his anxiety. His anxiety reduction techniques cause relationship problems. And the relationship problems raise his anxiety, and then he feels even more unsafe. So the whole point of this little conversation here is, at any point along the trajectory there could be some type of intervention. Anxiety is the first thing that happens. So there are a ton of anxiety reduction strategies. If you tackle that first thing, the anxiety, and he finds some anxiety reduction strategies, now he's not engaged in some of the more dysfunctional anxiety reduction attempts that cause relationship problems. So now you've intervened at the very front and tackled the second and third step in the sequence. So if the relationship problems are greatly reduced, then she doesn't have to have the talk as much. So now his anxiety is not increased as much. And so the cycle doesn't start over as frequently. And then when it does, it's not as severe. That's the big goal. That's usually what happens when everybody's working the program, is this cycle occurs less frequently, and then even when it does, it's less intense and problematic and lingers not quite as long as it did back in the day. I want you to start viewing yourself as an emotional battery. You already know that certain things charge your battery and certain things deplete your battery. And as an interesting side note, biologically you are a battery in the fullest sense of the term. You're a electrochemical bioorganism. And that's how the cells communicate with one another, through electricity and chemicals. And the juice in your battery are minerals. But that's a side note. Talking about the emotional battery analogy now, you will have certain things that charge your battery. For example, certainly engaging in your special interests will charge your battery. Good night's sleep will charge your battery. For those who meditate or get a massage or go to the gym or have a favorite hobby, those are just some examples. There would be dozens and more of that. There's certain things that you engage in that deplete your battery. You already know what most of those are probably. If you don't particularly enjoy your work and work is stressful, that's a depleter. Difficult conversations with her is a depleter. Doing anything that falls outside of your interest level is a depleter. Boredom is excruciating to people on the autism spectrum. And it's even kind of worse than that. It's actually an anxiety-producing thing. When he is bored, this generic key, it is painful, emotionally painful to withstand extended periods of boredom. An example of that would be idle chit-chat. You go to a family dinner, and there's your family, and they're all talking about shit that you have no interest in at all, and you try to hang in there and act like you care, and it's like, oh God, looking at your watch, I can get out of here. Work stress, marital stress, etc., are battery depleters. And so what I would like for you to do as an exercise, you don't have to do it now, of course, but I would like for you to spend a few moments later today, if you have time, and write this out, or open up a Word doc and do it. Just make a few notes. You don't have to spend a lot of time on this, because it'll vary from person to person. What depletes your battery? I would shoot for 5 things. What are 3 to 5 things that you know for a fact depletes your battery? That's on one column. Make another column, and what are some things that charge your battery? You will have some definite ideas. How will you know when your battery is low? Well, let's make it in the context of the neurodiverse wife, since that's why you're here. You will know that your battery is running low when you start getting agitated, frustrated, defensive, start moving in the direction of a meltdown or a shutdown or false agreement, where you just want to hurry up and agree with whatever she says to get her to hurry up and shut up. Or if you're just mad and going off on her that way with a little bit of an adult temper tantrum, you know for sure that you're reaching the point of depletion. How will you know when your battery's charged? You'll be calm, probably won't feel much of anything. You'll just know I'm okay inside. When I'm charged, I feel relaxed. I don't have any aches or pains. I'm not ruminating about things that are worrisome to me. I'm not remembering unwanted past events. I'm not worrying about future unwanted events. I'm just kind of okay. So what depletes your battery? What charges your battery? The whole point of this conversation is if you want to work on the marriage, which obviously you do, you wouldn't be here. She's got to have some of that battery life. If we wanted to put a percentage on it, which I think I do, and this may seem low to some of you, I'm going to say approximately 10% of your battery. Actually, some of you may think that's high. So out of a 12-hour day, we're assuming that you're recharging your battery through sleep. And let's just assume that you're up 12 to 14 hours a day. 5 to 10% of that battery life really needs to be used with her. Most of that energy for her really is going to be in the form of conversation. That's how you're going to be spending a small percentage of your energy with her. It's going to be in conversation. I want you to get familiar with when you're charged, and I want to get you familiar with when you're depleted. I'd like for you to save 10% for her, 5 to 10%. And here's the punchline. I want you to get very good at knowing when your battery feels low so you can tactfully dismiss yourself and recharge. And if you've done this little assignment ahead of time, well, like I've asked you to do on a piece of paper or Word doc, you already kind of know when you're feeling depleted. That was the first step in the assignment. What depletes my battery? How will I know when I'm starting to get depleted? How will I know when I'm charged? So save some of your battery for her. She might accuse you of never spending any of your emotional energy with her. That's what we're talking about here. This battery is an emotional battery. She might accuse you of not spending any emotional energy. In the moment that you're noticing, okay, I know I'm starting to feel depleted because I did this little assignment, and the thing that I wrote on that piece of paper is exactly what I'm going through now. So I need to tactfully dismiss myself so I can go recharge a bit. I don't necessarily have to go back and recharge 100%, but I need to at least go back and get up to like 50, at least 60%. If it's nothing particularly crucial that's going on with her in the moment, there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm just feeling a little stressed out right now, I'm going to go in there and watch a video or something, and kind of collect my marbles, and then I'll be back. But this has nothing to do with you. So you're letting her know, I need a little bit of a timeout. It's not anything that she said or did, but the big point is for you to catch your battery life before it hits zero, because as soon as it does that, you're at a Mac Daddy risk for meltdown, shutdown, adult temper tantrum, shit hitting the fan in general. Even if she's talking to you about a difficult day at work and she's complaining about somebody else, has nothing to do with you, even that will run your battery down fast. It's like your cell phone, and you're playing videos and you're playing games and you're talking on the phone, all three at the same time, that battery goes, zzz. Well, that's the perfect time to say, okay, I want to hear the full meal deal. I want to get everything, because it's important to you, therefore it's important to me. But right now, my battery is low and I'm not digesting everything that you're saying. Let me take a little brief time out to recharge, and I'll come back, and because I want to hear the entire thing. That would be a very loving, caring, empathic, compassionate thing to do. So with ASD, you have a lot of mind blindness, emotions blindness, executive function deficits, anxiety, sensory sensitivities, weak central coherence, problems with prediction, just to name a few. And so all that results in a lot of unpredictability in your life. And so what are you going to do if you have a lot of unpredictability? You're going to try to create as much predictability as possible. And one of the best ways to create predictability, if you live in a world of unpredictability, you're going to gravitate to your special interests, and you're going to want to hyper-focus on that special interest for extended periods of time. Why? Because his special interest provides a lot of predictability. Unpredictability creates a ton of anxiety. In fact, it's one of the main reasons he's chronically anxious. And so his special interest is one thing that he can count on, one thing that never changes, one thing that is predictable, one thing that doesn't raise his anxiety. So it's not that he is purposely trying to avoid you, it's that he's purposely trying to avoid unpredictability, and unfortunately you just happen to be one of those things that are highly unpredictable. In case you didn't know, you give off invisible energy, vibes that are tangible, even though you can't see them. If you are in the same room with him and you're so mad at him you could chop his head off, you are giving off some negative vibes, and it will affect him at some level. And he won't even know it, neither will you, what the hell's going on. I can promise you, if you want to test this, when you're at your maddest, try to be near him and see what happens.